Some men think money buys them the right to treat others like dirt. Trenton Roth was one of them. A Bellevue millionaire who loved humiliating a hard-working single dad in front of an elite private school. He thought the father was utterly defenseless. He thought nobody of consequence was watching. He was dead wrong, because standing quietly in the shadows was a billionaire tech CEO with a highly classified military past. And when Trenton crossed the final line, he didn't just awaken a protector. He summoned Phoenix 9. The rain in Washington state has a way of washing the color out of the world, leaving behind a cold, gray reality that Colin Weaver knew all too well. At 34, Colin was a man defined by the grease under his fingernails and the fierce, protective love he held for his 7-year-old daughter, Mia. 3 years had passed since Colin's wife, Rebecca, lost her brutal battle with leukemia. The medical bills had devoured their savings, forcing Colin to sell their suburban home and move into a cramped apartment above his independent auto shop, Issaquah Classic Motors. Colin wasn't a man who asked for pity. He woke up at 4:30 a.m. every day, his hands scarred and calloused from rebuilding alternators and restoring rusted-out chassis on classic muscle cars. His entire universe revolved around making sure Mia never felt the gaping void her mother had left behind. And when Mia, a quiet but brilliantly gifted child, scored perfectly on the regional aptitude exams, she was awarded a full-ride academic scholarship to the Oak Ridge Preparatory Academy in Bellevue. Oak Ridge was a fortress of extreme wealth. The campus looked more like a sprawling Ivy League university than an elementary school, boasting Olympic-sized swimming pools, equestrian facilities, and a parking lot that resembled a luxury car dealership. To Colin, it was an alien world, but for Mia's future, he was willing to endure anything. The friction began on the very first day of the fall semester. Colin's rusted 2004 Ford F-150 groaned in protest as it idled in the pristine, tree-lined drop-off lane. Ahead of him sat a gleaming, midnight black 2025 Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. Colin shifted his truck into park, stepping out to help Mia with her oversized backpack. As he did, the driver of the G-Wagon emerged. Trenton Roth was a managing partner at Apex Capital Group, a man who wore custom Brioni suits to school, drop-offs, and carried himself with the bloated arrogance of a man who had never been told no. Trenton sneered at Colin's work boots and faded flannel shirt, then glanced pointedly at the rusted fender of Colin's truck. "Careful with the door, buddy," Trenton loudly announced, his voice dripping with condescension. "My rims cost more than your entire livelihood. I'd hate to see what your insurance policy, if you even have one, would do if you scratched it." A few impeccably dressed parents turned to look, snickering behind their lattes. Colin felt a flush of heat rise in his neck, but he looked down at Mia. Her small, anxious eyes were watching him. Colin swallowed his pride, forcing a calm, reassuring smile. "I've got plenty of room, sir," Colin replied evenly, his voice steady. "Have a good morning," Trenton scoffed, adjusting his platinum Rolex. "Right, the scholarship program. They really need to rethink the zoning boundaries for this school." Colin didn't bite. He kissed Mia on the forehead, whispered a word of encouragement, and watched her walk into the grand brick building. But Colin wasn't the only one watching. Leaning against a sleek, matte silver Audi RS e-tron GT a few car lengths back was a woman who didn't fit the Oak Ridge mold, despite clearly possessing the wealth to belong. Evelyn Cross stood tall and utterly still. She wore a faded vintage leather bomber jacket over a simple black turtleneck, her eyes concealed behind classic aviator sunglasses. Evelyn was the CEO of Stratocom Innovations, a multi-billion-dollar aerospace defense contractor based in Seattle. However, Unlike the venture capitalists and trust fund parents of Oak Ridge, Evelyn hadn't inherited her empire. She had built it from the ground up after retiring from a highly decorated, heavily classified career in the United States Navy. Evelyn was at the school to drop off her 9-year-old godson, Oliver. She had watched the entire interaction between Colin and Trenton, while the other parents saw a poor mechanic backing down from a powerful millionaire. Evelyn saw something entirely different. She saw a man exercising incredible tactical restraint. She recognized the tightened jaw, the squared shoulders, and the conscious decision to de-escalate for the sake of his child. Evelyn pulled her aviators down the bridge of her nose, her piercing blue eyes locking onto Trenton Roth's retreating back. She had encountered men like Trenton 1,000 times in corporate boardrooms and Pentagon briefings. She despised them, and as Colin drove his rattling truck away, Evelyn made a mental note. The battle lines at Oak Ridge had just been drawn. 2 weeks later, the social event of the season descended upon the parents of Oak Ridge Preparatory, the annual Fall Charity Gala, hosted in the opulent Spanish ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel in downtown Seattle. Tickets were exorbitantly priced, but because Mia was a scholarship student, Colin received a complimentary invitation. He hadn't wanted to go. The thought of rubbing shoulders with the Bellevue elite made his stomach churn. But Mia had excitedly brought home the invitation, immensely proud that her dad was going to a fancy party for her school. Colin scraped together enough money to buy a heavily discounted, off-the-rack suit from a department store. It didn't fit quite right. The shoulders were too tight, the fabric too stiff, but he polished his only pair of dress shoes until they shone, determined to represent his daughter well. The Fairmont Olympic was a dazzling display of wealth. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, golden glow over the sea of designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos. Waiters in white gloves floated through the room, carrying silver trays of caviar and champagne. Colin stood near the perimeter, nursing a single glass of sparkling water, feeling entirely out of his depth. Across the room, holding court near the open bar, was Trenton Roth, surrounded by a sycophantic group of junior executives and wealthy parents. Trenton was on his 4th scotch and feeling exceptionally powerful. His eyes swept the ballroom and landed on Colin. A cruel, predatory smile spread across Trenton's face. "Look at this," Trenton muttered to his circle. "The mechanic decided to show up. Probably thinks they're serving a free buffet." A few of the men chuckled, emboldened by Trenton's wealth. Trenton handed his glass to a waiter and made a direct line toward Colin, his entourage trailing behind him like hyenas following a lion. "Weaver, isn't it?" Trenton projected his voice, intentionally loud enough to draw the attention of the surrounding guests. Colin turned, his posture straightening. "Hello, Mr. Roth." "I'm surprised to see you here," Trenton said, looking Colin up and down with exaggerated pity. "I didn't think this was your scene. Tell me, did you rent the polyester suit, or did you find it in a lost-and-found bin?" The group of men behind Trenton laughed aloud. Several other parents turned to watch the spectacle. The music from the string quartet seemed to fade into the background as a heavy, uncomfortable silence fell over that corner of the ballroom. Colin's knuckles turned white around his water glass. "I bought it for tonight. I'm just here to support the school. Same as you." Support the school?" Trenton scoffed, taking a step closer, invading Colin's personal space. "Let's be brutally honest, Weaver. You don't support this school. You leech off it. It's my donations, and the donations of the people in this room. That pay for your kid to sit in the same classroom as ours. You're a charity case, and frankly, it brings down the prestige of the entire academy having people like you loitering around the gala." The cruelty was so blatant, so unprovoked, that even a few of Trenton's cronies shifted uncomfortably. Colin stood frozen. The instinct to drop the glass and break Trenton's jaw was a roaring fire in his chest. But then he remembered Mia's face when she handed him the invitation. If he started a brawl at the Fairmont, they would expel her. Trenton would win. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Colin said, his voice dropping an octave, cold and remarkably steady. "Excuse me." Colin turned his back on the millionaire and walked toward the exit, refusing to give Trenton the satisfaction of a reaction. Trenton laughed loudly, raising his fresh glass of scotch. "That's right! Run back to the garage!" From a secluded leather booth in the VIP alcove, Evelyn Cross watched the entire exchange. She sat with her legs crossed, wearing a tailored charcoal pantsuit that cost more than Colin's truck, swirling a measure of Macallan 18 in her crystal glass. Her expression was completely unreadable. A mask of cold stone. Sitting across from Evelyn was an older man with silver hair and a military bearing that no civilian tuxedo could hide. Admiral Joseph Mitchell, a retired four-star commander of the Pacific Fleet and Evelyn's former commanding officer. They had remained close friends and business partners since her transition to the private sector. "You're staring, Evie," Admiral Mitchell noted, taking a sip of his bourbon. "You've got that look in your eye." "That man in the cheap suit," Evelyn said quietly, not breaking her gaze from the exit where Colin had just disappeared. "The one who just walked away from the trust fund bully." "What about him?" Mitchell asked. "He's a single father, lost his wife a few years ago. Busted his ass to get his kid in here," Evelyn replied, having already pulled Colin's basic background from the school's public directory weeks ago. "That bully is Trenton Roth. He's been harassing the father since day one." Admiral Mitchell sighed, setting his glass down. "It's the civilian world, Evelyn. Arrogance is their currency. Not much you can do about it without causing a scene." Evelyn took a slow, deliberate sip of her Macallan. The ice clinked softly against the glass. The air around her seemed to drop in temperature. "I don't mind causing a scene, Joe," Evelyn murmured, her eyes locking onto Trenton Roth, who was now drunkenly boasting to his friends. "In fact, I excel at it." The tension that had been brewing since the gala finally boiled over 3 weeks later at the Oak Ridge Preparatory Science and Innovation Fair. The school gymnasium had been transformed into a sprawling exhibition of youthful engineering and creativity. Parents wandered the aisles, marveling at the intricate projects on display. For Colin and Mia, this event was everything. They had spent over a month working on Mia's project, a fully functional, miniature Ferris wheel, powered entirely by a custom-built solar circuit. Colin had taught Mia how to solder the tiny wires, and she had meticulously painted the aluminum frame. It was a masterpiece of 7-year-old engineering, and Mia was beaming with pride. Standing nervously beside her table in a neat blue dress, a few tables down, stood Hunter Roth, Trenton's son. Hunter's project was a high-end, commercially purchased drone that he had barely taken out of the box, let alone built. Trenton stood behind his son, loudly bragging to the judges about the aerodynamics of the expensive toy. Clearly trying to buy his son a ribbon, bored and seeking attention, Hunter picked up the remote control and launched the heavy drone into the air inside the gymnasium. The loud buzzing of the rotors drew irritated looks from the staff, but no one dared tell Trenton Roth's son to ground it. Hunter flew the drone recklessly over the aisles. He spotted Mia standing proudly by her Ferris wheel. With a malicious smirk that perfectly mirrored his father's, Hunter drove the joysticks forward. The heavy, 4-propeller drone banked sharply and slammed directly into Mia's table. The impact was devastating. The drone's carbon fiber blades sliced through the delicate solar panels and shattered the aluminum struts of the Ferris wheel. The intricate project, a month of love and hard work, exploded into a tangle of bent wire and broken plastic. The drone clattered to the gymnasium floor, unharmed. Mia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears instantly welled in her eyes as she looked at the ruined remains of her project. Colin, who had been grabbing a bottle of water from the concession stand, heard the crash. He sprinted over, dropping to his knees beside his daughter. "Mia, are you okay? Did it hit you?" "My wheel," Mia sobbed, pointing a trembling finger at the wreckage. "Dad, it's ruined." Colin's heart shattered. He picked up the broken pieces, the sheared wires mocking the late nights they had spent laughing and building it together. He looked up and saw Hunter snickering, holding the remote control. Colin stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He walked calmly over to the Roth table. Trenton saw him coming and puffed out his chest, stepping in front of his son like a bodyguard. "Your son just destroyed my daughter's project," Colin said, his voice vibrating with a dangerous, suppressed intensity. "I want him to apologize to her right now." Trenton laughed incredulously. "Apologize? It was an accident, and it was just some garbage made out of scrap metal anyway. I'll write you a check for $50. Weaver, go buy her a Barbie." This isn't about money." Colin stepped closer, his jaw locked. "It's about respect. He broke it on purpose. Have him apologize." "Well, don't you take that tone with me, you grease monkey," Trenton snarled, his face turning red. The gymnasium was suddenly completely silent. Every parent and judge had stopped to watch. "You have no right to give demands in this building. I sit on the board of directors. I can make one phone call and have your brat's charity pass revoked by morning. You don't belong here. You are nothing." To emphasize his point, Trenton stepped forward and shoved Colin hard in the center of his chest. Colin stumbled back a half step. The physical contact flipped a switch in his brain. The years of grief, the exhaustion, the endless humiliation, it all coalesced into a blinding white rage. Colin dropped his shoulders, his fists balling into rocks, preparing to drive his knuckles straight through Trenton's jaw. But before Colin could swing, a hand clamped down on his shoulder. It wasn't a gentle, comforting touch. It was a vice grip, rooted in absolute authority and tactical leverage. "I stand down, Mr. Weaver." The voice was female, but it carried a chilling, commanding weight that froze Colin in his tracks. He turned to see Evelyn Cross standing beside him. She was dressed casually in dark jeans and her signature leather jacket. But the way she carried herself was terrifying. She stepped smoothly between Colin and Trenton, effectively shielding the mechanic. Trenton blinked, caught off guard by the sudden intervention. He looked Evelyn up and down, failing to recognize the billionaire CEO without her corporate armor. "Why? And who the hell are you supposed to be?" Trenton spat, puffing his chest back out. "His girlfriend? Move aside before I have security throw you both out on the street." Evelyn didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, her blue eyes pinning Trenton like a sniper locking onto a target. "My name is Evelyn Cross," she said quietly, though her voice carried perfectly across the dead-silent gymnasium. "And if you ever lay a hand on this man again, Trenton, I will personally ensure that the only thing you're managing is the commissary line in a federal penitentiary." Trenton let out a harsh, mocking bark of laughter. "Are you threatening me? Do you have any idea who I am, sweetheart?" Evelyn took a single, deliberate step forward, invading Trenton's space with an aura so intensely intimidating that the millionaire subconsciously took a half step back. The air crackled with the imminent promise of devastation, setting the stage for a reckoning Trenton Roth could never have anticipated. The silence in the gymnasium was suffocating. Dozens of parents, faculty members, and students watched as Evelyn Cross, a woman most of them only vaguely recognized from drop-off lines, stood dead center between Colin Weaver and the wealthiest man in Bellevue. Trenton Roth's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson. He wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by a woman in a faded leather jacket who didn't possess the obvious markers of high society. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing into venomous slits. "I know exactly who you are now," Trenton sneered, recovering his bravado. "You're the godmother of that quiet kid in the 4th grade. You think because you lease an Audi, you can walk in here and threaten a board member. I manage capital funds that eclipse the GDP of small nations. I can ruin this mechanic with a single phone call, and I can have you banned from this campus for trespassing." Evelyn didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone was absolute ice. "Make the call, Trenton. I highly encourage it. But know this. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. You are stepping into an arena you do not comprehend." Trenton barked a harsh, dismissive laugh, turning his back on her. He grabbed his son, Hunter, by the shoulder. "Come on, we're leaving. The air in here is starting to smell like a soup kitchen." As Trenton stormed out, the gymnasium slowly exhaled. The murmurs began instantly, a buzzing hive of Bellevue gossip. Colin knelt back down, his large, calloused hands gently gathering the shattered pieces of Mia's solar Ferris wheel. His hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the massive dump of adrenaline that was slowly receding from his bloodstream. Evelyn knelt beside him, picking up a bent aluminum strut. "You shouldn't have done that," Colin said softly, refusing to look at her. "I had it handled. Now he's going to come after you, too." "I don't need protecting, Mr. Weaver," Evelyn replied smoothly, placing the metal piece into the box. "But you needed a buffer. If you had hit him, the King County Police would have arrested you for assault. You would lose custody, and Mia would lose her scholarship. That was exactly what he wanted." Colin paused, looking at his daughter. Mia was wiping away tears, clutching a broken solar panel to her chest. The reality of Evelyn's words hit him like a physical blow. He had been a fraction of a second away from throwing everything away for a moment of pride. "Thank you," Colin forced the words out, swallowing his pride. "I'm Colin. This is Mia." "Evelyn," she said, offering a rare, gentle smile to the little girl. "That was an incredibly sophisticated circuit board. Mia, I know a few aerospace engineers who couldn't solder joints that clean." Mia sniffled, looking up shyly. "Really? Really?" Evelyn confirmed. She stood up, adjusting her jacket. "Take your daughter home. Colin, let me handle Trenton Roth." But Trenton Roth was not a man who waited to be handled. By 8:01 a.m. the following Monday, Colin was summoned to the office of Principal Bennett, the headmaster of Oak Ridge Preparatory. Colin sat in the leather chair opposite the heavy mahogany desk. Principal Bennett, a nervous man who clearly deferred to the wealth of his board members, refused to meet Colin's eyes. He slid a crisp, watermarked envelope across the desk. "I am incredibly sorry, Mr. Weaver," Bennett said, his voice tight. "But the board of directors convened an emergency session last night. Following the altercation at the science fair, they have voted to immediately revoke Mia's academic scholarship, citing a breach of the school's code of conduct regarding parental behavior." Colin felt the floor drop out from underneath him. "My behavior? Trenton Roth shoved me in front of 50 witnesses. His son purposefully destroyed Mia's project. And you're punishing my 7-year-old daughter. Mr. Roth claimed he was defending himself against your aggressive posture." Bennett stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "He is the largest individual donor to our STEM program. He pushed the vote through. You have until Friday to clear out Mia's locker. I truly am sorry, Colin, but my hands are tied. Colin walked out of the school in a daze. The crisp autumn air felt thin, unbreathable. He climbed into his rusted F-150, gripped the steering wheel, and let out a guttural scream of pure, unadulterated frustration. He had failed her, despite all the late nights, the burned hands, the relentless exhaustion. A billionaire had crushed their dream with a single, spiteful whim. He didn't know that 3 miles away. In the hyper-secure, penthouse suite of Stratocom Innovations, a different kind of meeting was taking place. Evelyn Cross stood in front of a wall-to-wall digital monitor. The screen was filled with complex financial flowcharts, offshore bank routing numbers, and corporate registries. Sitting at the conference table was Wyatt, her chief of corporate intelligence, a former NSA cyber analyst who owed his life and career to Evelyn. "You asked me to dig into Apex Capital Group," Wyatt said, tapping his tablet. "I didn't have to dig deep. Trenton Roth is sloppy. He's arrogant. He assumes SEC regulators won't look closely at a boutique Bellevue firm." Evelyn crossed her arms. "What did you find, Wyatt?" "He's running a highly sophisticated shell game." Wyatt grinned, bringing up a red-flagged document on the main screen. "He's over-leveraged by about $80 million. To cover his margin calls, he's been quietly siphoning funds from his clients' escrow accounts and padding the losses with fabricated returns. It's a classic embezzlement structure. If the market dips even 3%, his entire portfolio liquidates, and he faces federal prison." Evelyn's eyes tracked the data. A cold, predatory satisfaction settled over her features. Trenton Roth had chosen to use his power to crush a helpless mechanic. Evelyn was about to show him what real power looked like. "Package the data," Evelyn ordered, her voice dropping into the authoritative cadence she once used in military command centers. "Draft a blind dossier. I want it prepped for the SEC Enforcement Division, the FBI Financial Crimes Unit, and the Wall Street Journal." "Done," Wyatt nodded. "When do we pull the trigger?" "Not yet," Evelyn said, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the gray Seattle skyline. "He took something from Colin Weaver. Before I burn Trenton Roth's empire to the ground, I'm going to make him give it back." Issaquah Classic Motors was located on a grim industrial strip right off Interstate 90. The garage smelled heavily of motor oil, old leather, and ozone from the welding rig. Colin was underneath a 1968 Mustang Fastback, his face shielded by a welding mask, showering the concrete floor in bright blue sparks. He was working aggressively, trying to burn off the suffocating anxiety of Mia's expulsion. He didn't hear the Matt Silva Audi pull up. He didn't hear the footsteps until they were directly beside his boots. Colin shut off the torch, flipped up his mask, and slid out from under the chassis on his creeper. He blinked, surprised to see Evelyn Cross standing in his dirty garage. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that looked drastically out of place among the discarded tires and greasy toolboxes. "I hear you do good work with alternators," Evelyn said casually, looking around the shop. Colin sighed, sitting up and wiping the grease from his forehead with a dirty rag. "How did you find my shop?" "I have a background in logistics," Evelyn replied smoothly. She looked at the exhaustion etched deep into Colin's face. "Principal Bennett called me this morning. He told me about the scholarship revocation. He was looking for a corporate donation to fill the gap." Colin threw the rag onto a workbench, his shoulders slumping. Trenton Roth won. He got exactly what he wanted. I spent 3 years telling Mia that if she worked hard, the world would reward her. I lied to her. The world just rewards the people who already own it. Evelyn stepped closer, her expression softening just a fraction. "Colin, do you know what Stratocom Innovations does?" Colin frowned, confused by the pivot. "You build plane parts, don't you?" "We build advanced telemetry and target acquisition systems for fifth-generation fighter jets," Evelyn corrected him. Before I founded this company, I spent 15 years in naval intelligence. I specialized in asymmetric warfare. I hunted men who hid behind money, power, and armies. I dismantled them piece by piece. Colin stared at her, the realization slowly dawning on him that this woman was not just a wealthy Bellevue socialite. There was a lethal precision in her posture, a calculated coldness in her eyes that sent a shiver down his spine. "Why are you telling me this?" Colin asked. "Because you are an honest man, Colin, and Trenton Roth is a parasite," Evelyn said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "You protected your daughter at the gala. You protected her at the science fair. Now, it's my turn to protect you. I need you to put Mia in her school uniform tomorrow morning and drive her to Oak Ridge Preparatory. Exactly as you always do. Evelyn, her pass is deactivated. The security guards won't even let us through the gates. Trust me," Evelyn said, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that demanded absolute compliance. "Be there at 8:30 a.m. Meanwhile, inside the opulent, glass-walled offices of Apex Capital Group, Trenton Roth was having an exceptionally good week. He poured himself a glass of 20-year-old Pappy Van Winkle bourbon, celebrating the successful bullying of the mechanic. He loved the feeling of absolute control. It was intoxicating. His desk phone buzzed. It was his private, unlisted line. Annoyed, Trenton picked it up. "Roth," he barked. "Mr. Roth." A synthesized, electronically altered voice echoed through the receiver. You have 72 hours to liquidate $40 million in assets to cover the shortfall in the offshore accounts of your primary investors." Trenton froze. The glass of bourbon stopped halfway to his mouth. "Who is this? Is this a joke?"
The Financial Industry Regulatory Authority has received an anonymous tip regarding the embezzlement of client funds via your Cayman Island shell corporations.
The voice continued, smooth and relentless. "If you do not return the stolen funds by Thursday at 5 p.m., a full, unredacted dossier of your fraudulent wire transfers will be handed over to the FBI. Have a pleasant afternoon." The line went dead. Trenton dropped his glass. It shattered on the imported hardwood floor, splashing expensive bourbon everywhere. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through his chest. No one knew about the Cayman accounts. He had buried them under layers of encrypted corporate identities. He scrambled for his keyboard, logging into his secure offshore portals. His screen flashed red. Access denied. Account frozen, pending investigation. Trenton's breathing grew ragged. He grabbed his cell phone, dialing his chief financial officer. "Get in here right now. We have a breach. Someone is inside our network." Over the next 12 hours, Trenton Roth's perfectly curated world began to implode. His credit lines were suddenly and inexplicably suspended. His major investors began calling, aggressively demanding audits of their portfolios after receiving anonymous, highly detailed emails suggesting financial mismanagement. Trenton was trapped in a rapidly tightening vice, and he had absolutely no idea who was turning the handle. Tuesday morning arrived with a heavy, overcast gloom. Colin parked his rusted F-150 across the street from the grand iron gates of Oak Ridge Preparatory. Mia sat in the passenger seat, wearing her pristine uniform, her backpack sitting in her lap. She looked terrified. "Dad, are you sure about this?" Mia whispered. "Mr. Bennett said I wasn't allowed back." Colin gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "We're trusting a friend. Mia, just sit tight." At 8:15 a.m., the board of directors of Oak Ridge Preparatory convened for their monthly executive meeting in the school's lavish mahogany boardroom. Trenton Roth sat at the head of the table, looking haggard. He hadn't slept a wink. He was running entirely on espresso and sheer panic, desperately trying to keep his composure while his financial empire burned down around him. He needed this board meeting to be a brief distraction so he could return to the office and stop the bleeding. Principal Bennett stood at the front of the room, clearing his throat. The first item on the agenda is the formal ratification of the Weaver expulsion. Mr. Roth has generously offered to donate $50,000 to the new athletic center to offset the administrative costs of... Before Bennett could finish his sentence, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom were thrown open. The security guard stationed outside stumbled backward, looking incredibly flustered. Walking past him with the unstoppable momentum of a freight train was Evelyn Cross. She wore a striking navy blue trench coat over a sharp power suit. But it wasn't just Evelyn. Flanking her right side was Admiral Joseph Mitchell, dressed impeccably in a dark, bespoke suit, his posture radiating military authority. Behind them stood two men in severe black suits carrying thick leather briefcases, Evelyn's high-priced corporate litigators. Trenton slammed his hands on the table. Standing up so fast, his chair tipped over. "What the hell is this? Security! Get these people out of here. This is a closed executive session." Evelyn ignored him completely. She walked to the opposite end of the long mahogany table, her heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. She stopped, placed her hands flat on the polished wood, and stared down the length of the table, directly at Trenton. "This session is now open," Evelyn declared, her voice ringing out with absolute command. "You have no authority here," Trenton shouted, his face purple with rage and exhaustion. "You're just a parent. I am the chairman of the board." "Actually, Mr. Roth, you aren't." Admiral Mitchell spoke up, his deep, gravelly voice silencing the room instantly. He opened a leather folder and slid a certified document across the table toward Principal Bennett. As of 7 a.m. this morning," Mitchell continued, "Stratocom Innovations, through a subsidiary holding company, purchased the entire commercial debt of Oak Ridge Preparatory. We also initiated a hostile buyout of the private land trust that owns the acreage beneath this building. Evelyn Cross is now the majority stakeholder and the sole proprietary owner of this institution." The boardroom erupted into stunned gasps. The wealthy parents and executives sitting at the table stared at Evelyn in sheer disbelief. Trenton's jaw went slack. You bought the school," Bennett stammered, staring at the legal documents. That's a $30 million acquisition. 32.5, actually," Evelyn corrected coldly. "And my first act as the sole proprietor of this academy is to dissolve the current board of directors, effective immediately." "You can't do this!" Trenton screamed, his voice cracking as the remnants of his power disintegrated. "I am Trenton Roth. I have influence in this city you can't even fathom." Evelyn's expression darkened. The time for games was over. She gestured to one of her lawyers, who unlatched his briefcase and pulled out a thick, bound dossier. He tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy, damning thud. "Your influence is an illusion, Trenton," Evelyn said, her voice dropping into a lethal, quiet register that forced everyone in the room to lean in. "That dossier contains complete forensic accounting of Apex Capital Group. It details 72 counts of wire fraud, the embezzlement of your clients' retirement funds, and the illegal offshore laundering you've been conducting for the past 4 years." Trenton physically recoiled, his face draining of all color. He looked at the dossier as if it were a live grenade. The anonymous hacker, the frozen accounts, the terror of the last 12 hours all suddenly made perfect, horrifying sense. "You did this," Trenton breathed, staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. "I did," Evelyn confirmed, showing absolutely zero mercy. "At 9 a.m., my legal team forwarded those exact documents to the SEC and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. By lunchtime, federal agents will be raiding your corporate offices. By dinner, you will be in a holding cell, facing 2 decades in federal prison. The other board members, realizing they were sitting next to a highly radioactive criminal, immediately began scooting their chairs away from Trenton. He was a sinking ship, and Evelyn had just blown the final hole in his hull. Trenton fell to his knees, his arrogance completely shattered. The billionaire bully was suddenly nothing more than a terrified, broken man. "Please," he begged, tears welling in his eyes. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll give back the money. I'll apologize to the mechanic. Just don't send it to the FBI." Evelyn looked down at him, her eyes completely devoid of sympathy. "You attacked a little girl's future to satisfy your own pathetic ego," Evelyn whispered, leaning over the table. "I don't accept apologies. I exact consequences." Evelyn turned her back on the sobbing millionaire and looked at Principal Bennett, who was physically shaking. "Mr. Bennett," Evelyn said sharply. "Yes, Ms. Cross?" "There's a young girl sitting in a Ford F-150 across the street," Evelyn commanded. "Her name is Mia Weaver. Her academic scholarship is to be fully reinstated and upgraded to a permanent endowment. You will personally walk out to those gates, apologize to her father, and escort her to her classroom. If you ever allow her to be marginalized again, I will not just fire you, I will end your career in education. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, ma'am! Immediately! Ma'am!" Bennett practically tripped over himself as he sprinted out of the boardroom to fetch Mia. Admiral Mitchell watched Bennett run, then turned his gaze back to Evelyn, a proud, subtle smile touching the corners of his mouth. The shadow war was over. The boardroom was secured. But the true depth of Evelyn's power, and the terrifying legacy of the name Phoenix 9, had yet to be fully revealed to the man waiting outside in his rusted truck. The morning air outside the wrought-iron gates of Oak Ridge Preparatory was thick with a damp, Pacific Northwest fog. Inside the rusted cabin of his 2004 Ford F-150, Colin Weaver sat with his hands gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles bleached white from the tension. The engine idled with a rhythmic, heavy rattle. Beside him, little Mia clutched her backpack, her eyes wide and fearful, staring at the imposing brick facade of the school that had unceremoniously rejected her. "Dad," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "Everyone is going inside. The bell is going to ring." Colin checked his watch. It was 8:37 a.m. Evelyn Cross had told him to be here, to wait, to trust her. But the seconds were dragging on like hours, and the lingering doubt in his mind was beginning to metastasize into full-blown panic. Had he been a fool? Had he dragged his daughter back here just to subject her to another round of public humiliation? Just as Colin reached for the gear shift to put the truck into drive and leave, the heavy oak front doors of the academy burst open. Principal Bennett practically sprinted down the concrete steps. The man was moving with a frantic, uncoordinated desperation, his expensive silk tie flapping over his shoulder. His face flushed a dangerous shade of magenta. He blew past the bewildered security guards and jogged directly toward Colin's battered truck, waving his arms wildly. Colin rolled down his window, his brow furrowed in deep suspicion. "Mr. Weaver! Colin! Please! Wait!" Bennett gasped, bracing his hands on his knees as he reached the driver's side door, desperately trying to catch his breath. Rainwater beaded on his bald forehead. "What is this, Bennett?" Colin demanded, his voice hard. "Are you out here to threaten us with trespassing? Because I'm parked on a public street." "No! Good heavens! No!" Bennett sputtered, standing up straight and attempting to smooth his ruined suit. He looked at Colin with an expression of sheer, unadulterated terror. "Mr. Weaver, I have made a catastrophic error in judgment, a horrific oversight. The board, well, the former board, acted rashly. I am here to formally apologize to you And more importantly, to Mia. Bennett leaned down, looking across the cab to the little girl. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. Mia, sweetheart, your academic scholarship has not been revoked. In fact, it has been upgraded to a permanent, fully funded endowment. Your locker is right where you left it. Your desk is waiting. If you would allow me the honor, I would like to personally escort you to your first period class. Colin stared at the headmaster, entirely stunned. He looked from Bennett's terrified face to the sprawling campus. What happened in there? Change in management. Bennett swallowed hard, his eyes darting back toward the school doors as if he expected a sniper to take him out. Please, Mr. Weaver, let me take her inside. Colin turned to his daughter. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by a tentative, blossoming hope. He leaned over, kissed her cheek, and gave her a reassuring nod. Go on, kiddo. I love you. Have a great day. Mia beamed, unbuckling her seatbelt and hopping out of the truck. Bennett treated her as if she were made of spun glass, gently guiding her through the gates. Colin killed the engine. The adrenaline was pumping so fiercely through his veins that his hands shook. He stepped out of the truck and walked through the grand iron gates himself, ignoring the stares of the wealthy parents lingering in the courtyard. He didn't stop until he reached the executive administrative wing. The mahogany doors to the boardroom were wide open. Inside, a team of sharply dressed corporate lawyers were packing up briefcases, while two terrified administrative assistants were shredding documents. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the athletic fields, were Evelyn Cross and Admiral Joseph Mitchell. Colin stepped into the room. Evelyn. Evelyn turned, her expression softening instantly at the sight of the mechanic. Colin, did Mia get to class? Bennett practically rolled out a red carpet for her, Colin said, his voice thick with emotion. He walked closer, looking at the Billionaire CEO. Bennett said the board is gone. He said there was a change in management. What did you do? I bought the school, Evelyn stated simply, as if she were talking about buying a cup of coffee. And I dismantled Trenton Roth's financial empire. He won't be bothering you, or anyone else in this city, ever again. Colin was at a loss for words. The sheer scale of what she had done to protect a mechanic and his daughter was unfathomable. Why? Why would you go to war for us? You barely know me. Admiral Mitchell, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. He crossed his arms over his broad chest, fixing Colin with a piercing, deeply respectful gaze. Because, Mr. Weaver, you are the exact type of man she spent her entire life protecting, Admiral Mitchell said, his gravelly voice echoing in the cavernous boardroom. You see Evelyn Cross, the billionaire CEO of Stratocom Innovations. But long before she wore tailored suits, she wore a different uniform, in the United States Naval Special Warfare Command, and later within the Joint Special Operations Command. She wasn't known as Evelyn. Mitchell paused, looking at Evelyn with a mixture of immense pride and old sorrow. Her operational call sign was Phoenix 9. Colin frowned, the military terminology washing over him. Phoenix 9? She was a Tier 1 intelligence operative and a tactical acquisition specialist, Mitchell explained, stepping closer to the table. 10 years ago, during a highly classified extraction mission in the Helmand province of Afghanistan, a forward operating base was overrun. The men pinned down weren't Navy SEALs or Marine Force Recon. They were Seabees, combat engineers, mechanics, men who worked with wrenches and blowtorches, just like you. Men with grease under their fingernails who were just trying to build infrastructure so their families back home could have a better life. Evelyn looked away, her jaw tightening. The memory was clearly a ghost that still haunted her. High Command ordered a retreat, Mitchell continued, his voice dropping into a solemn register. They deemed the mechanics expendable, But Phoenix 9 didn't accept that order. She went rogue. She commandeered a heavily armored transport, drove directly into a hostile fire zone, and held the line single-handedly for 4 hours until air support could arrive. She saved 22 mechanics that night, but she took 3 rounds to the chest plate and 1 to the shoulder. It ended her military career. Colin stared at Evelyn, utterly speechless. The leather bomber jacket she always wore suddenly made perfect sense. It hid the scars. "I despise bullies, Colin." Evelyn finally spoke, her voice quiet but ringing with titanium resolve. "I spent my youth hunting warlords and dictators who used their power to crush the defenseless. When I entered the corporate world, I realized the battlefields had just changed. Instead of AK-47s, the warlords use hedge fund, margin calls, and social status. Trenton Roth thought he could destroy your daughter's life because you were just a mechanic. He didn't realize that I have a very, very soft spot for mechanics." Colin felt a lump rise in his throat. The magnitude of her intervention, the deep-seated trauma and honor that drove her, was overwhelming. He closed the distance between them and extended his rough, calloused hand. I don't have millions of dollars, Evelyn," Colin said, his voice thick with raw gratitude. "But if you ever need anything, a rebuilt engine, a tire changed, or someone to stand at your back, you have me. For the rest of my life." Evelyn looked at his grease-stained hand, then reached out and gripped it firmly. Her grip was startlingly strong. "I'll hold you to that, Colin." The downfall of Trenton Roth was swift, merciless, and incredibly public. At exactly 12:15 p.m. that same Tuesday, 3 black, armored SUVs belonging to the Federal Bureau of Investigation leaped the curb outside the glass-fronted Bellevue headquarters of Apex Capital Group. Special Agent Carter, a no-nonsense veteran of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, led a team of 20 windbreaker-clad agents through the revolving doors. They didn't stop at the reception desk. They moved with tactical precision, flooding the elevator banks and breaching the top-floor executive suites. Employees screamed and scrambled backward as agents began yanking hard drives from servers and boxing up physical ledgers. Trenton Roth was sitting at his desk, staring blankly at a frozen computer screen, when Agent Carter kicked his mahogany door open. "Trenton Roth, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act," Carter announced loudly. The handcuffs already out. Trenton didn't even put up a fight. The blustering, arrogant billionaire who had shoved a single father in a gymnasium just a week prior was now a weeping, broken shell of a man. As he was frog-marched out of his own building, his wrists secured tightly behind his back in cold steel, news helicopters from KRO 7 and King 5 were already circling overhead, broadcasting his humiliation to the entire Pacific Northwest. By nightfall, he was sitting in a 6x8 concrete cell at the Federal Detention Center in SeaTac, stripped of his custom Brioni suit and wearing an orange jumpsuit. His empire was dust. Meanwhile, life for Colin Weaver took a wildly unexpected turn. A week after the Boardroom blitz, Colin was working late at Issaquah Classic Motors. He was under the hood of a dilapidated 1980 Chevy C10, struggling with a seized alternator bracket. The shop was quiet. The only sound the rhythmic tapping of rain against the corrugated tin roof and the classic rock playing faintly from a grease-stained radio. The heavy rumble of a diesel engine outside caught his attention. A massive, flatbed transport truck backed slowly into his gravel lot. Colin wiped his hands on a rag and walked out into the cool night air. The driver hopped out of the cab, clutching a clipboard. "You Weaver?" "That's me," Colin nodded. "Delivery for you. Fully paid transport," the driver said, handing Colin the clipboard. Colin signed the manifest, then watched as the hydraulic bed of the truck lowered. Resting on the platform was a breathtaking, yet clearly neglected, piece of American automotive history. A 1969 Chevrolet Camaro, Z28. It was painted a faded Daytona yellow, with twin black racing stripes that had crackled under decades of sun exposure. The chrome was pitted, the tires were flat, and it looked like it hadn't been started since the Reagan administration. But to Colin, it was a masterpiece waiting to be reborn. As the driver unchained the chassis and rolled the heavy muscle car into Colin's bay, a familiar matte silver Audi pulled into the lot. Evelyn Cross stepped out, wearing a pair of well-worn denim jeans and a simple gray Henley shirt. She walked into the garage, admiring the rusted Camaro under the harsh fluorescent lights. "It belonged to my father," Evelyn said quietly, running a hand over the dusty fender. "He bought it brand new when he returned from his first tour in Vietnam. When he passed away, it sat in a barn in eastern Washington for 20 years. I've tried to have it restored before, but the high-end boutique shops in Seattle just wanted to gut it and drop a modern computer in it. They didn't understand the soul of the machine." She turned to Colin. "I want it rebuilt, bolt by bolt. Original specs. I want to feel the engine shake the chassis when it turns over. Can you do it?" Colin walked around the car, his eyes scanning the rusted quarter panels, the sagging suspension, the oil-stained engine block. He could already see the finished product in his mind's eye. "It'll take 6 months. It's going to be a lot of late nights. I'll have to source original parts from salvage yards across the country. I don't care how long it takes, and I don't care what it costs." Evelyn smiled. "I want you to bring it back to life." And so began a routine that slowly transformed their lives. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, Evelyn would leave the hyper-sterile, high-stress environment of Stratocom Innovations, trade her CEO power suits for work clothes, and drive to Issaquah Classic Motors. She didn't just drop the car off. She stayed. She learned how to bleed brake lines, how to gap spark plugs, and how to operate the pneumatic sander. For Evelyn, the garage became a sanctuary. For years, she had carried the immense weight of her military past and the crushing responsibility of running a billion-dollar defense contracting firm. She was surrounded by board members who wanted her money, politicians who wanted her influence, and military brass who wanted her tech. But in Colin's garage, she wasn't a CEO. She wasn't Phoenix 9. She was just Evelyn, a woman trying to fix her dad's car. Colin, too, found something he hadn't realized he was missing. Since his wife Rebecca died, he had built a wall around himself and Mia, trusting no one, convinced it was them against the world. But working alongside Evelyn, sharing quiet beers on the tailgate of his truck at midnight while the Camaro's engine block soaked in degreaser, Colin found an equal. He found someone who understood sacrifice, someone who didn't judge him by his bank account. Mia thrived in this new dynamic. Evelyn became a fixture in her life. The brilliant former intelligence operative recognized Mia's staggering intellect and began nurturing it. When Evelyn realized Mia had a profound grasp of circuitry, she started bringing discarded, declassified telemetry components from Stratocom for Mia to tinker with. By the time winter rolled around, a 9-year-old girl was building advanced algorithmic motherboards on a folding table in the corner of an auto shop, while a single dad and a billionaire rebuilt a V8 engine 10 feet away. Oak Ridge Preparatory, under Evelyn's new ownership, underwent a radical transformation. Principal Bennett was kept on a ruthlessly tight leash, and the culture of toxic elitism was systematically dismantled. Evelyn implemented a massive expansion of the scholarship program, ensuring that dozens of brilliant children from lower-income neighborhoods were given the same opportunities as the Bellevue elite. Trenton Roth's son, Hunter, was quietly transferred to a different school out of state, the shadow of his father's crimes too heavy to bear in Seattle. Slowly, the trauma of the past began to heal. Colin's auto shop flourished. Word had quietly spread through Admiral Mitchell's extensive network of wealthy, classic car-owning veterans that Colin Weaver was a master mechanic. Soon, Colin had a wait list 6 months long, filled with vintage Porsches, classic Mustangs, and antique Jaguars. He was finally able to move himself and Mia out of the cramped apartment above the shop and into a beautiful, modest 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood, lined with evergreen trees. He had financial stability, he had respect, but most importantly, he had a partner who stood shoulder to shoulder with him in the trenches of life. 1 year exactly after the fateful incident that had brought them together, the Oak Ridge Preparatory Academy hosted its annual Spring Science and Innovation Exhibition. The atmosphere in the grand gymnasium was completely unrecognizable from the tense, exclusionary environment of the previous year. The room was vibrant, buzzing with genuine excitement and collaboration. There were no arrogant parents boasting about how much money they spent on their children's projects. Instead, students of all backgrounds stood proudly by their creations. In the center aisle, drawing the largest crowd of the evening, stood Mia Weaver. Now 8 years old, she had grown taller and far more confident. She wore a neat white blouse and a dark skirt, her eyes sparkling with intense focus as she spoke to a panel of highly impressed judges, which included several actual aerospace engineers that Evelyn had invited from Stratocom Innovations. Mia's project was not a delicate Ferris wheel. It was a fully autonomous quad-rotor drone, programmed with spatial mapping algorithms that allowed it to navigate complex obstacle courses without human input. It was the kind of technology university seniors struggled to perfect. Yet Mia explained the code with the effortless grace of a prodigy, standing on the elevated indoor track overlooking the gymnasium, leaning against the metal railing, were Colin and Evelyn. Colin wore a beautifully tailored, dark navy suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. A gift from Evelyn. He looked healthy, rested, and deeply happy. Evelyn stood beside him, wearing an elegant emerald green evening dress that contrasted sharply with the dangerous, tactical aura she always carried. They watched Mia command the drone, making it perform a flawless barrel roll through a series of suspended hoops. The judges erupted into applause. She used a localized sonar array to map the hoops, Evelyn murmured, a proud smile gracing her lips. I told her to stick to infrared, but she insisted the sonar would yield a faster response time. She was right. She usually is. Colin chuckled, taking a sip of his sparkling water. She's outgrowing me, Evie. I used to be able to help her with her math homework. Now she's writing code I can't even read. I asked her what she wanted for her birthday, and she requested a high-capacity soldering station and a book on theoretical aerodynamics. I'll have Wyatt pull some restricted textbooks from the defense archives. Evelyn laughed softly. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the ambient noise of the gymnasium. Colin looked at the woman beside him. He thought about the day she stepped between him and Trenton Roth. He thought about the millions of dollars she had spent, the empire she had toppled, simply to protect a little girl's dream. The Camaro is done, Colin said quietly, shifting the conversation. Evelyn turned to look at him, her blue eyes widening slightly. You finished the interior trim. Last night, Colin nodded. The engine purrs like a tiger. It's loud, it's angry, and it's perfect. It's ready for you to drive it off the lot. Evelyn looked back down at the gymnasium floor, watching Mia receive a massive blue ribbon for first place. I don't think I'm going to take it. Colin frowned, confused. What do you mean? You spent a fortune restoring it. I don't want it sitting in my sterile, empty garage at my penthouse, Evelyn said, her voice dropping into a softer, more vulnerable register. I want it to stay at the shop. I want an excuse to come over on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I want to teach Mia how to change the oil. She paused, struggling to articulate a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to experience since she left the military. "I want to be around my family." Colin's breath caught in his throat. He looked at Evelyn, seeing past the billionaire CEO, past the legendary Phoenix 9, straight to the heart of a woman who had fought her whole life to protect others, but had never allowed anyone to protect her. Colin reached out, his hand gently covering hers where it rested on the metal railing. He laced his fingers through hers. "The car stays in the shop," Colin said softly, his thumb tracing the knuckles of her hand. "And the door is always open, for as long as you want to walk through it." Evelyn looked at their intertwined hands, then up into Colin's eyes. For the first time in 10 years, the heavy, invisible armor she wore finally cracked, falling away to reveal genuine, unburdened peace. She squeezed his hand tightly. Down below, Mia looked up at the balcony, spotting her father and her mentor standing together. She waved her blue ribbon enthusiastically, her face illuminated by a smile so bright it could have powered a city. Colin and Evelyn waved back, a united front, an unbreakable team. Trenton Roth had tried to use his wealth to destroy a single father, believing that the world belonged to those who could buy it. But he had forgotten a fundamental truth of the universe. True power doesn't come from bank accounts or corporate titles. True power comes from the fierce, unrelenting love of a parent, and the terrifying loyalty of a soldier who refuses to let the innocent stand alone. The bully had summoned a fire he couldn't control, and in the ashes of his empire, a mechanic, a genius little girl, and a legendary operator had built a family that could never be broken. What did you think of Evelyn's incredible takedown of Trenton Roth? Sometimes, the most dangerous people in the room are the ones standing quietly in the shadows. If you loved seeing this arrogant billionaire get exactly what he deserved, and enjoyed the heartwarming journey of Colin, Mia, and Phoenix 9, hit that like button. Don't forget to share this story with your friends who love a satisfying revenge tale, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, real-life dramas delivered straight to you every week. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in Colin's shoes? Let's talk about it.